Kevin Rodriguez had delivered more than 1,000 pizzas in his 2 years working for Domino's in Omaha, but no customer intrigued him as much as the girl at 4872 Maple Street. It was exactly 6 p.m. when his GPS indicated that he had arrived at the familiar address, a two-story Victorian house with peeling paint and permanently closed curtains. While holding the box of traditional pepperoni pizza, Kevin recalled every detail of the last 42 consecutive deliveries at the same time. The girl, Charlotte Murray, according to the app, always showed up wearing long-sleeve clothes, even during the heat wave that hit Nebraska that summer. "Good evening, Charlotte," Kevin said, maintaining the professional smile that masked his growing concern. The teenager, who looked about 16, opened the door just a crack, just enough to pass the money and get the pizza. "Thanks," she murmured, her brown eyes avoiding direct contact. Kevin noticed the purple marks on her wrist when she held out the dollar bills, similar to the ones he had seen the week before. Back on his delivery bike, Kevin couldn't ignore the disturbing pattern he had been observing for weeks. In his previous deliveries, he had mentally cataloged a number of disturbing details. Charlotte always paid in cash, crumpled, as if hastily put away. She never opened the door fully. And on none of the 42 visits had he seen any sign of other residents, although he occasionally heard male voices coming from inside the house. At Domino's Central, Melissa Parker, his supervisor, noticed Kevin's pensive expression when he returned. "That house on Maple Street again?" she asked, well aware of the young delivery man's concern. "Something's wrong, Mel," Kevin replied, running his hands through his dark hair. "It's been almost 2 months. Same time, same pizza, always alone. And today I saw more marks on her arms." Melissa sighed, sitting down next to him during the pause. "Did you check the address history?" "Yes." Kevin took out his cell phone, showing the notes he had made. The house belonged to an elderly couple, the Mays, who passed away about 8 months ago. Charlotte is supposedly their granddaughter, under the guardianship of a Richard Bennett. But something doesn't add up. She only started showing up 2 months ago. The next day, Kevin arrived at work early to investigate further. Using the store's computer, he looked up the previous owners of the house. Martha and George Murray had indeed died at the beginning of the year, a week apart. Public records showed that the house had passed into the care of Richard Bennett, supposedly appointed guardian of Charlotte Murray, the couple's teenage granddaughter. "I found something." Melissa called Kevin over to her desk. "The Murray's obituary doesn't mention any granddaughter. In fact, it says they had no children." Kevin felt a shiver run down his spine. His suspicions were beginning to take concrete shape. "We need to do something, Mel. That girl could be in danger." "You're right," Melissa replied, picking up the phone. "I'll call social services. But we need more information." That evening, at 6 p.m., Kevin stood in front of the Victorian house again. This time, however, he was prepared. Discreetly, he put his cell phone in his jacket pocket with the camera on. Charlotte opened the door as usual, but Kevin was determined to make more meaningful contact. "The weather's getting warmer, isn't it?" he commented casually, noticing how she was pulling down the sleeves of her blouse. "It is," she replied, her eyes briefly meeting his before drifting to the floor. "It must be uncomfortable to wear long sleeves in this heat," Kevin ventured, keeping his tone light, but watching her reaction carefully. Charlotte froze for a moment, her hands trembling slightly as she held the pizza box. That's when a male voice sounded from inside the house. "Charlotte? Who's there?" The fear that crossed the girl's face was unmistakable. "Nobody, Uncle Richard. Just the usual delivery man." Kevin kept his composure, but his heart raced as he noticed the terror in her voice. As he walked back to his bike, he heard the sound of a door slamming hard inside the house. That same evening, Kevin compiled all the evidence he had collected. Photos of the marks on Charlotte's arms, records of the daily deliveries, the inconsistencies in the Murray documents, and the video he had just recorded. With Melissa's help, he sent everything to the police department and the Child Protection Service. 3 days later, when Kevin made his usual delivery, he noticed a different movement in the neighborhood. Undercover cars were strategically positioned along the street. As he approached the door, his heart was pounding, knowing that this delivery would be unlike any other. Charlotte opened the door, as usual, but before she could close it, a team of police and social workers emerged from the shadows. Richard Bennett was arrested trying to escape through the back of the house. The investigation revealed that he had falsified guardianship documents and had been holding Charlotte for 2 months after kidnapping her from a shelter in Kansas City. As the officers escorted Charlotte out of the house, she stopped briefly in front of Kevin. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she asked with tears in her eyes. Kevin just nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and emotion. "Sometimes a pizza can be more than just a pizza," he replied softly. The girl smiled for the first time in all those deliveries, a fragile but genuine smile that carried the weight of her gratitude. As she was led to the welfare car, Kevin realized that his delivery routine would never be the same again. And that was a good thing. 2 days after Charlotte Murray's rescue, Kevin couldn't sleep. Sitting in his small apartment in Omaha, he mentally relived the events that had led him to suspect that something was wrong in that Victorian house. The police file, now open, revealed a story even darker than he had imagined. Charlotte had disappeared from a shelter for teenagers in Kansas City 3 months earlier. Richard Bennett, a former welfare official with a history of harassment charges, had falsified documents using information from the deceased Murray to create a convincing story of legal guardianship. "You did more than your job required," said Detective Andrea Morrison, sitting across from her at the police station during the formal deposition. The investigator, a middle-aged woman with piercing eyes, leafed through her meticulous notes. A lot of people would have simply ignored the signs. Kevin adjusted himself in the uncomfortable chair in the interrogation room. "It was the accumulation of small details," he explained. "The crumpled money always in the same amount, as if she had a limited amount hidden away. The clothes unsuitable for the weather, but mostly her eyes. There was so much fear in them." Detective Morrison nodded, pushing her reading glasses up her nose. Bennett had an elaborate system. He left enough frozen food for a week, locked Charlotte in during the day while he worked in Lincoln, and monitored the house remotely via cameras. Pizza was her only connection to the outside world. The story made Kevin feel nauseous. He remembered all the times he had delivered that pepperoni pizza, wondering if he could have acted sooner. The detective, sensing his distress, leaned forward. "Don't blame yourself. You built a solid case methodically. If you'd acted on impulse, Bennett might have realized it and disappeared with her again." At Domino's, things had changed. Melissa turned the experience into mandatory training for all delivery workers, teaching them to spot signs of abuse and human trafficking. Kevin unwittingly became an example of how small observations could save lives. "Every order tells a story," he explained to new employees during training sessions. "We're not just pizza delivery guys, we're eyes and ears in the community." A week after the rescue, Kevin received an unexpected call. Charlotte wanted to see him. The meeting was organized at the welfare office, a modern building in downtown Omaha. The teenager looked different. She was wearing a colorful short-sleeved t-shirt, her hair was tied up in a casual ponytail, and something in her posture had changed. "I brought you something," she said, holding out an envelope. Inside was a handmade card, decorated with drawings of pizza slices. The message was simple: "Thank you for seeing what I couldn't say." "How did you know?" Charlotte asked, her voice firmer than in the previous 42 deliveries. That something was wrong? Kevin thought for a moment, organizing his words. It was like a puzzle. Each delivery added a piece. The always exact time, the closed curtains, the way you cringed when you heard his voice. Little details that made up a bigger picture. The social worker, Lisa Chun, who was supervising the meeting, discreetly took notes. Charlotte's case was becoming an important study on identifying signs of human trafficking in urban environments. Bennett chose that Murray house specifically, explained Lisa. A property owned by deceased people, with no close neighbors, on a street where people keep their distance from each other. Isolation was part of the plan. Charlotte nodded, playing with the edge of the envelope. "He said that no one would miss me, that I was invisible, but you saw me." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Catherine Reeves, Charlotte's new foster family. She's a retired teacher with decades of experience looking after teenagers in vulnerable situations. "She's going to live with us in Council Bluffs," Catherine explained, her gentle smile revealing frown lines that spoke of years dedicated to healing wounded hearts. Closer to her biological family in Kansas City, but far enough away for a fresh start. Kevin watched as Charlotte interacted with Catherine, noticing how the teenager already seemed more relaxed, closer to how a 16-year-old girl should be. The fear was still there, in the shadows of her gestures, but now there was also hope. "I still like pizza," Charlotte commented with a small smile, "but I think I'll try different flavors now." The simple phrase carried a greater weight. It was a declaration of freedom, of choices regained. Kevin felt his eyes water, but he maintained the professional composure he had developed in his years as a delivery man. As he said goodbye, Kevin realized that his life had changed irrevocably. His deliveries would never be the same again. Every address, every customer, every detail now carried a new meaning. Detective Morrison met him in the parking lot. "You know, Kevin, we're always looking for observant people like you. Have you thought about a career in investigation?" Kevin looked at his delivery bike, remembering all the nights riding through the streets of Omaha. "Actually," he replied, "I think I can make more of a difference right where I am. Every train delivery person is another pair of eyes on the street." The detective smiled, understanding perfectly. Sometimes the most effective heroes are those who work in the shadows of everyday life, observing, noticing, acting. And sometimes, a simple pizza delivery can be the beginning of a story of salvation. A month after Charlotte's rescue, Kevin discovered that the ramifications of the case went far beyond what he had imagined. One rainy morning, Detective Morrison summoned him to an urgent meeting at the Omaha police station. The case had sparked a wider investigation into a human trafficking ring that stretched across 3 states. Bennett wasn't acting alone, Morrison explained, spreading photographs out on his desk. "We found connections to similar disappearances in Iowa and Missouri, all involving deceased people's homes and forged documents." Kevin examined the photos. Other teenagers, other addresses, the same disturbing pattern. One in particular caught his eye, a house in Des Moines, almost identical to the Murrays, where a girl had disappeared 3 months before Charlotte. "We need your help, Kevin," Morrison continued, adjusting his glasses. "You've developed a trained eye for these signs. We're setting up a training program for couriers across the region, and we want you to be our consultant." The proposal took Kevin by surprise. His routine at Domino's had changed since the Charlotte case. He now personally trained each new delivery person, teaching them to look beyond appearances. But this was different, this was bigger. "Bennett's talking," Morrison added, his voice carrying a dark weight. "But only after we've shown you the evidence you've collected." Your detailed observations broke his alibi. That afternoon, during his shift at the pizzeria, Kevin couldn't stop thinking about the other girls in the photographs. Melissa noticed his distraction as he organized the day's deliveries. "You saved a life, Kevin," she said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "And now you have the chance to save many more." "That's not all, Mel," he replied, running his hands over his tired face. "I keep thinking how many other Charlottes there are out there, waiting for someone to notice the signs." The store bell rang, interrupting the conversation. A woman entered, gray hair, elegant posture, gentle but determined eyes. Kevin recognized her immediately. Catherine Reeves, Charlotte's temporary guardian. "Charlotte asked me to deliver this personally," said Catherine, holding out an envelope. Inside was an invitation to the graduation of the recovery program Charlotte was attending. "She made sure you'd be there." Kevin felt a lump in his throat as he read the invitation. In just 1 month, Charlotte had made more progress than anyone had expected. Catherine explained that she was preparing to testify against Bennett and help identify other victims of the network. "She has nightmares every night," Catherine shared, her voice soft but firm. "But do you know what she says when she wakes up scared? That if you haven't given up looking for the truth, she won't give up recovering either." Those words echoed in Kevin's mind throughout the day. Every delivery he made now carried new meaning, every interaction an opportunity to make a difference. The training Morrison proposed could turn hundreds of delivery drivers into keen observers, multiplying the chances of identifying suspicious situations. In the evening, after his shift, Kevin drove to the Murray house. The property was empty, the windows boarded up, a for sale sign waving in the wind. He parked his bike and stared at the Victorian facade, remembering each of the 42 deliveries he had made there. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Morrison with new information. The investigation had identified 3 more suspicious houses in nearby towns. "We need you at the police station early tomorrow morning," the message said. "Bring your notes on the patterns you've observed." Kevin took one last look at the house before leaving. What had once seemed like just another address on his route had become the catalyst for a much bigger change. His observations were no longer just about pizzas and tips. They were about lives that could be saved. On his way home, he passed the welfare office, where a light still shone in Lisa Chin's office. The social worker was working late, as usual, coordinating efforts to track down other possible victims of Bennett's network. "People underestimate the power of everyday observation," Lisa had said during one of her meetings. "Sometimes the difference between freedom and captivity is in the eyes of a stranger who cares enough to pay attention." Kevin parked his motorcycle in front of his apartment, but before he got on, he did something that had become a ritual over the last few weeks. He opened his notebook and recorded every suspicious detail he had observed during the day's deliveries. Little signs that, on their own, might mean nothing, but together could tell a story that needed to be heard. Charlotte's graduation was in 2 weeks' time. Kevin already knew that this event would mark not only her recovery, but also the beginning of his own journey as part of something bigger. The pizza delivery man who noticed the invisible signs was about to become part of a much wider protection network, proving that sometimes the most effective heroes are those who simply choose to pay attention. The graduation of the recovery program took place on a Thursday afternoon at the Council Bluffs Community Center. Kevin watched Charlotte on stage, her posture more confident as she received her certificate. Next to him in the audience, Detective Morrison discreetly wiped her eyes, trying to disguise her emotion. 6 teenage girls rescued in 3 different states since we started the training program, Morrison whispered, consulting her notes. All connected to Bennett's network. The success of the program had exceeded expectations. In the last fortnight, Kevin had traveled through Nebraska, Iowa, and Missouri, conducting workshops for food delivery workers, letter carriers, and other professionals who regularly interacted with households. His method of systematic observation was becoming official protocol. After the ceremony, during the small reception, Charlotte approached Kevin carrying a worn notebook. "I found this among my things," she said, opening it carefully. "I started writing when I was in that house. I think it might help other people." The diary revealed disturbing details about Bennett's method. He specifically chose the homes of recently deceased people, studied family records to create convincing stories, and used his experience in the welfare system to falsify documents. He had a list, Charlotte continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Other addresses, other names. I saw when he thought I was asleep." Morrison, who had joined the conversation, immediately started making notes. "This could be crucial for locating other victims," he explained. "Every detail counts." The following week, Kevin resumed his regular deliveries, but something had changed. Every street, every house told a different story now. His trained eyes picked up signs that would have gone unnoticed before. Curtains permanently closed, security cameras at suspicious angles, patterns of behavior that stood out. During a delivery in the North Omaha area, Kevin noticed something familiar. An old house, recently sold after the owners passed away, showed the same pattern of isolation that he had observed in the Murray residence. Discreetly, he photographed the address and sent it to Morrison. "Good work," the detective replied a few hours later. "The property was bought by one of Bennett's associates. We're monitoring it." In his apartment, Kevin kept a wall of newspaper clippings and notes on similar cases. Melissa jokingly called him the pizza detective, but the work was producing real results. 3 days earlier, a delivery man in Kansas City, trained by Kevin, had identified a suspicious situation that led to the rescue of 2 teenage girls. "You've created something bigger than yourself," Lisa Chin commented during a follow-up meeting. The social worker was helping to implement an alert system involving various sectors of the community. "It's like an invisible safety net." Kevin's phone rang. It was Charlotte. She was preparing to testify at Bennett's trial next week and wanted to review her notes on the deliveries. "Every pizza you brought was like a little window to the outside world," she reflected. "Even if I couldn't say anything, knowing that someone was paying attention gave me hope." Kevin remembered each of those deliveries, the little clues he had gathered day after day. The crumpled money, the long sleeves and the heat, the fear in his eyes. Now, those same signs were helping to identify and rescue other victims. I sometimes wonder how many people walked past that house and didn't notice anything wrong, Charlotte continued. How many others just handed over their things and left? The question hung in the air. Kevin knew that before Charlotte's case, he himself could have been one of those people, focused only on completing his deliveries, blind to the subtle signs that something was wrong. Morrison organized a special task force, incorporating delivery workers and other professionals from the community as trained observers. The program, initially viewed with skepticism by some officials, was proving its worth with each new rescue. Human trafficking thrives in the shadows of normality, Morrison explained during a training session. We need watchful eyes everywhere, ordinary people making a difference in their daily routines. Kevin continued to deliver pizzas, but each delivery now carried a greater purpose. His Domino's uniform had become a kind of disguise, allowing him to observe and record without arousing suspicion. At night, reviewing his notes from the day, Kevin reflected on how a simple pizza delivery had triggered such a significant change. Charlotte's case was no longer just about a rescued girl. It had grown into a larger movement, a network of ordinary people determined to make a difference. You taught me to see the extraordinary in the ordinary, Charlotte wrote in a message. Now it's my turn to pass it on. Kevin kept the message with his notes, knowing that each new day brought the possibility of making a difference in someone's life. The streets of Omaha were no longer just his delivery territory. They were a field of observation where every detail could tell a story that needed to be heard. Richard Bennett's trial began on a cold October morning in Omaha District Court. Kevin watched from the gallery as Charlotte, wearing a navy blue blazer borrowed from Catherine, walked determinedly to the witness stand. Her testimony would be crucial not only in convicting Bennett, but in exposing the entire trafficking network. Miss Murray, began Prosecutor Amanda Sullivan, a woman in her 40s known for her skill in sensitive cases. Can you tell us how Mr. Bennett maintained control over other victims? Charlotte took a deep breath, her fingers lightly gripping the edge of the lectern. He had a black notebook where he kept all the details. Addresses of empty houses, names of dead people, information about other girls. I saw him updating it late at night, when he thought I was asleep. The revelation caused a buzz in the room. Kevin noticed Bennett squirming in his chair, his once confident face now showing concern. Detective Morrison, sitting next to Kevin, was scribbling furiously in her notebook. Was the notebook found? Asked the prosecutor. It wasn't in the house, Charlotte replied, but I memorized some addresses. I was afraid that other girls were going through the same thing as me. During the trial break, Morrison pulled Kevin into a side room. We need that notebook, she said, spreading a map out on the table. Charlotte mentioned a storage facility in Council Bluffs where Bennett kept documents. We got a warrant. Kevin recognized one of the addresses on the map. It was only 2 blocks from where he used to make deliveries. That abandoned warehouse on Oak Street? I always thought it was strange how busy it was there at night. The operation was organized for that very night. Kevin, who knew the area well, was asked to assist as a civilian consultant. From his vantage point in a disguised van, he guided the team through the peculiarities of the place. The back entrance has a false camera, he reported over the radio. Bennett always used the side one when I saw him around here. The SWAT team found much more than they expected. In addition to the black notebook, there were dozens of folders with forged documents, photos of potential victims, and, most disturbingly, a detailed map with markings in 3 different states. It's bigger than we imagined, Morrison muttered, examining the documents in the dim light of the van. Every mark on this map is an empty or recently sold house. He had a whole system. Kevin recognized a few addresses. They were houses he had delivered to in recent months, places that had set off his internal alarms, but which he hadn't yet managed to fully connect. Back in court the next day, the new evidence completely changed the course of the case. Bennett, confronted with a mountain of evidence, began to negotiate a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would provide information about the entire network. 7 years of planning this, Morrison shared with Kevin during a break. He used his work in social care, to identify vulnerable teenagers while mapping empty properties. A patient predator. Charlotte was present when Bennett began his detailed confession. Kevin watched as she firmly held the hand of Catherine, her new guardian, while each layer of the criminal operation was exposed. The training program you started, Lisa Chan commented to Kevin, has already identified 3 other suspicious situations in Denver and Salt Lake City. Other similar networks are being investigated. The courtroom was packed with professionals that Kevin had trained: delivery men, letter carriers, utility workers. Ordinary people who had learned to turn their daily routines into opportunities to make a difference. "You've created something revolutionary," Melissa said over lunch. "It's not just about pizza deliveries anymore. It's about creating a vigilant and compassionate community." As more details emerged from Bennett's confessions, it became clear that the case had uncovered only the tip of the iceberg. Similar networks were operating in other parts of the country, using the same methods to take advantage of failing systems and inattentive communities. "Each person we train is like shining a light into the shadows," Kevin explained during a later training session. "We don't need to be heroes. We just need to be aware and care enough to act." The impact of the case began to spread beyond state borders. Police departments in other states began requesting the training program, recognizing the value of having trained observers in their communities. Charlotte, strengthened by her role in exposing the network, decided to become a civil rights lawyer. "I want to use my experience to change the system," she told Kevin after another day of depositions, "so that no one else has to wait 42 pizza deliveries to be saved." Kevin continued his deliveries, but now each route was an opportunity to train new observers, to expand the protection network that had begun with a simple suspicion. The pizza delivery man who noticed the signs had become a catalyst for change, proving that sometimes the biggest impacts start with the smallest observations. "You taught me that heroism isn't about big acts," Charlotte wrote in a note to Kevin. "It's about paying attention when it would be easier to look the other way." The year that followed Bennett's trial transformed Kevin Rodriguez from a simple pizza delivery man into a central figure in the fight against human trafficking in the American Midwest. On a crisp fall morning, he stood before an audience of 400 professionals at the Omaha Convention Center, sharing his experience at the first national symposium on preventing human trafficking. "Systematic observation is not paranoia," Kevin explained, showing slides with examples of subtle signs. "It's about recognizing patterns that deviate from normality. A door that never fully opens, curtains that are always closed, crumpled cash payments. They're all pieces of a bigger puzzle." In the front row, Charlotte Murray, now a law student at the University of Nebraska, was taking detailed notes. Her case had become a key study in the development of the Rodriguez Protocol, as Kevin's identification system came to be known. Since the implementation of the program, Detective Morrison presented the figures on her panel. "We have identified and rescued 23 victims in similar situations. Most impressively, 19 of these rescues were initiated by alerts from delivery workers and other service professionals." The success of the program attracted national attention. News networks began covering the story of the pizza delivery man who revolutionized the fight against human trafficking. Kevin, however, kept his job at Domino's, arguing that his credibility came precisely from staying connected to the reality of the streets. "The real power is in the vigilant community we create," Kevin explained during an interview with CNN. "Every delivery person, letter carrier, or utility technician is a potential trained observer. They are the eyes and ears that criminals don't expect to find." Bennett's network was completely dismantled, revealing connections to similar operations in 12 different states. The black notebook found in the warehouse led to more than 40 arrests and the rescue of dozens of victims. Charlotte testified in several of these cases, her strength inspiring other survivors to do the same. "Kevin didn't just save my life," Charlotte declared during the symposium. "He created a system that continues to save others. Every pizza delivered now carries the possibility of release." The Department of Justice has begun implementing the Rodriguez Protocol in official training programs. Melissa Parker, Kevin's former supervisor, traveled the country helping to set up training centers in different cities. "It's like a positive chain reaction," Melissa explained during a workshop in Denver. "Every person we train multiplies our ability to identify and prevent abuse." Catherine Reeves, who continued to be a stabilizing force in Charlotte's life, developed a complementary program focused on psychological support for rescue victims. Trauma doesn't end with rescue, she emphasized. We need to create a support network as efficient as our identification network. On one particularly significant night, Kevin received a call from Detective Morrison. A network similar to Bennett's had been identified in Seattle, using the same methods of empty houses and forged documents. The difference? It was discovered before it claimed any victims, thanks to a deliver man trained by the program. "We're changing the game," Morrison commented, his voice carrying obvious pride. "Predators are losing their hiding places in the shadows of normality." The impact of Kevin's work extended beyond American borders. Delegations from other countries began visiting Omaha to study the program. The effective simplicity of the system, training ordinary people to recognize subtle signals, proved to be universally applicable. Charlotte, now an intern in the DA's office, was working on the legal expansion of the program. "We're developing legislation to protect whistleblowers and facilitate communication between different agencies," she explained during an update meeting. Kevin kept an up-to-date wall in his apartment, no longer just with newspaper clippings, but with photos of rescued people and letters of thanks. Each story represented a life transformed, a cycle of abuse broken. "The most important thing I learned," Kevin shared at the conclusion of the symposium, "is that heroism doesn't require superpowers. It just requires the willingness to pay attention and the courage to act when something seems wrong." The Murray home was eventually demolished, making way for a community center focused on preventing human trafficking. Charlotte suggested the name, Rodriguez Observation Center, a tribute to the man who turned pizza deliveries into an instrument of justice. "Every small act of attention can trigger a big change," Kevin reflected, watching the new center being inaugurated. "You never know when a simple delivery can be the start of a silent revolution." Kevin's legacy continued to grow, not through grandiose acts, but through the multiplication of attentive observers on every corner, in every street, in every city. The pizza delivery man who noticed something amiss had become the architect of a safety net that extended far beyond Omaha, proving that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest observations. That evening, making his last delivery of the day, Kevin smiled as he saw a new deliverman meticulously applying the protocol he had developed. The silent revolution continued, one pizza at a time, proving that heroes can emerge in the most unlikely places, armed only with attention and compassion.